on 5 Live.
Bright blue skies and sunshine in Barcelona as Formula One gears up for the beginning of an intense triple header. 2 practice sessions down, 1 to go before we head into qualifying later this afternoon. My name's Harry Benjamin, and guiding you through all the coverage alongside myself is former F1 mechanic Mark Priestley and BBC F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. Mark, Lando Norris topped free practice 1. Lewis Hamilton was fastest in free practice 2. Where are we at ahead of FP3 in qualifying?
Well, as ever, you take the absolute times with a slight pinch of salt. However, what I would say is yesterday gave us a little insight into this question we've all been asking. Have the results over the last couple of rounds at these slightly odd circuits in Montreal and, of course, Monaco, are they real? Is it a real indicator that there is now more than one team in this fight? And I think we got the answer yesterday, and that absolutely there is. Mercedes definitely looks stronger. McLaren still in the mix there or thereabouts. And Max Verstappen definitely going to be a contender, definitely a major player in this party. But there's more than him in it now. Absolutely.
Well, we'll be getting the track action underway shortly. But first, we should mention a bit of worrying news ahead of free practice 3. We've seen and heard of a fire breaking out in the McLaren hospitality. Andrew, what more do we know about the situation?
Well, information's a bit scant at the moment, but McLaren have just issued a statement which says that the paddock hospitality unit was evacuated because of a fire alert. There was smoke coming out of the motorhome that we've seen. They say the team has been safely evacuated while the local fire brigade handled the issue.
Okay, well, as we get more updates on that, we will bring it to you throughout the course of our coverage over the next hour or so for this final free practice ahead of qualifying for the Spanish Grand Prix. Let's bring you up to speed then with how the points standings lie. In the drivers, it's Max Verstappen who leads the way, 194 points to his name. He's got a 56-point buffer over Charles Leclerc. Then it's Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez having not scored in the last 2 races. In fact, 2 retirements for Perez, falls to 5th in the drivers. Over in the Constructors' Championship, it's Red Bull who lead the way with 301 points. They are 49 clear of Ferrari. Then it's McLaren, Mercedes and Aston Martin rounding out the top 5. It's RB who head up the second part of the field in 6th ahead of Haas. Alpine with a double point score last time out in Canada, jump ahead of Williams and Sauber, the only team 10th and last and yet to get off the mark, with drivers Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu still on 0 points apiece. But we come to this Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya, for round 10 of the Formula One season. Just over 4.6 kilometres, 2.8 miles, 8 corners to the right, 6 corners to the left. It is a flowing track, tough on the neck. And Mark, it's a track that everybody knows so well. You alluded to it right at the start of the programme. We've been here for so many years, not only for Grand Prix, but also for testing. And that's why I suppose it's a bit more of a barometer for where we're at in terms of pecking order.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, I dread to think how many days of my own life have been spent at this circuit in my years in Formula One. But it is a place that's popular and that is familiar with people. However, the sort of calendar, we touched on it yesterday, the calendar has shifted. Some of the drivers mentioned this in the press conferences. The calendar's now shifted almost away from what we call the more traditional circuits, and we've now got so many more street circuits and sort of slightly different configurations of racetrack on the calendar now, in a long calendar season, of course, that actually, I don't know if it is a barometer of the whole season. It's a barometer of certainly the rounds that are coming up. We've got Austria, of course, we've got here in Spain, we've got Silverstone, places like Spa and Hungary over the next few weeks and months. And maybe what we're going to see this weekend is a real example of what we might see play out over those rounds, which is interesting.
Do you think people will be sad to lose Barcelona potentially? It's got a couple more years left on its contract. 2026 onwards, Madrid, the street circuit, comes onto the calendar as the Spanish Grand Prix. It's not yet confirmed whether Barcelona will completely drop off, whether it will stay on, whether it will alternate. But do you think people will actually be that disappointed to lose it?
It's not actually if we go back over history, it's rarely actually generated really good racing, hasn't it? It's one of those circuits that's from an engineering point of view, it's a great circuit for testing your cars, for understanding how your aerodynamics work, how much aerodynamic efficiency you've got, and how it can work through a different variety of corners. But actually on race day, it doesn't always tend to deliver because the number of overtaking opportunities are not that great. They made a tweak to the circuit last year by eradicating that sort of final chicane, giving us a faster run onto that start-finish straight. But I don't think people are going to miss it, too greatly. If Spain manages to hold on to a race via its Madrid circuit, which is coming, the Spanish fans, of which there are many, 2 Spanish drivers, of course, in the sport, will remain happy.
It's an interesting situation, isn't it, Harry, the Spanish Grand Prix? Historically, it's one of the oldest races on the calendar. It started way back in the beginning of the 20th century with the classic European road races. It's been through a number of racetracks in Spain, but it never really took hold in the country until Fernando Alonso came along. When he did, interest erupted, as you would imagine, with the driver of that caliber representing the country. And obviously he's probably going to go on for another 20 years now, Fernando, isn't he? But and now we've got Carlos Sainz as well. But they've struggled a bit like France in a way to come up with a track that is befitting of Formula One. France was where the first Grand Prix was held. There have been some great French tracks in Formula One. You think of Charade and Clermont-Ferrand, Rouen, Le Mans itself is a fantastic circuit, although it doesn't have a Formula One licence. But the only F1 standard tracks in France are a bit rubbish, frankly, Magny-Cours and Paul Ricard. I wouldn't call the circuit de Barcelona-Catalunya rubbish. It's a very technically interesting circuit, but it's not Monza or Spa or Monaco or even Austin, for example, which is of the newer tracks is a real classic already. I don't suppose the Madrid street track, of sorts, because it's going to be near Barajas Airport, it's not going to be actually in the centre of Madrid, is going to change that massively. Barcelona is a fantastic, world-class city, but then so's Madrid. So actually I don't think Spain or Formula One is really losing out in any way significantly by moving the race from Barcelona to Madrid.
I used to really enjoy the Valencia street track, especially I think the last race it held, 2012,
yeah,
I think
it was.
And yeah, Fernando Alonso had a brilliant win there, and I think that was Michael Schumacher's last podium in Formula One. It was a fantastic race through the streets. I mean, unfortunately, that's now become a bit of a derelict piece of land now within Valencia. But Madrid does come onto the calendar from 2026 and is scheduled to be there until 2035 at the moment.
It's worth saying, actually, this is not the first time that Madrid has had a race close to it. So Jarama, which hosted the race through the 70s and early 80s, before it switched to Jerez, is near Madrid, and it's also the site of a very famous battle in the Civil War.
Yeah, FP3 has just started a few minutes in. Lewis Hamilton out on track at the moment. First man out on the track. He topped free practice 2 in a Mercedes that seems to be improving its pace, hoping to be fighting up there. We haven't quite yet seen, though, what Red Bull and Max Verstappen have got. Should also say there was a small fire that broke out in the McLaren hospitality unit ahead of practice, but that is under control, everybody being evacuated and fire brigade on the scene. FP3 on now, BBC website and app. So 56 minutes and 41, 40, 39, 38 seconds remain of free practice 3. Sorry, just had to do a quick update into 5 Live. Bit of admin for you there, but you know the deal by now. Lewis Hamilton has just come across the line. He's out there on the soft compound tyre. The only man out on track, nobody else in a rush. A 1:14.178, his first lap time. And actually, it does seem like from yesterday, the single lap pace of the both Mercedes looks okay. They're looking in good shape.
So obviously the important thing from yesterday is not so much the single lap pace, it's the long run pace. But the conclusion of pretty much everyone from both of them yesterday was that there is a 4-car battle at the front and Mercedes are in it. Mercedes themselves were pretty encouraged by their performance yesterday. Of course, we don't know what the fuel loads and engine modes were on, and also the couple of things that queered the picture yesterday was Max Verstappen did his initial race simulation run on medium tyres, whereas everyone else did softs pretty much. So it's hard to compare because the soft's not going to be a great race tyre around Barcelona because it's so demanding on the tyres. The second thing is that Verstappen was running a lowish downforce setup yesterday, and he's expected to change to a higher downforce setup today. Again, you don't know how that's going to change the relative performance of the Red Bull.
Why would he run a low downforce setup?
Well, they're just experimenting, aren't they? Perez was experimenting too. Perez was all over the place yesterday. Didn't have had another really not very good day. So that's one thing to look out for from him, because he does seem to be in a bit of a... Well, I was about to call it a downward spiral, but he seems to have already downwardly spiraled and hit the bottom for a few races. See if he can spiral himself back up again, Sergio Perez.
The thing about Fridays is it is all about learning. The very point of those practice sessions on Friday are that you sort of experiment, you try different things. There were a lot of new components brought to a lot of different cars yesterday, so upgrades up and down the grid. You need to... It's the very first time those upgrades will run on a car, other than in a simulation or in a wind tunnel. So this is the first time you get to experience what it actually feels like from a driver's perspective. What does the data look like on the real car compared to the data that you've been collecting back at the factory? So there's a lot of work goes on in terms of trying different things. And then, of course, on Friday evening, it's about crunching those numbers, analysing the data, debriefing your drivers, learning what you can from it. You can, of course, then have the freedom to make changes to your car, like we're talking about with Max Verstappen. Maybe he found that a low downforce setup didn't really work, didn't give him what he needed. You can then make those changes, and now here we are in FP3, where you get to experience the results of those changes for the very first time ahead of qualifying.
Yeah, Verstappen is the sound you're hearing right now. He is out on track. Hamilton's just come into the pits, so it's Verstappen out on track along with Kevin Magnussen, who's also just ventured out onto the track on the hard compound of tyre. Verstappen gearing up now for a quick lap on the mediums, getting up to almost 320 kilometres an hour before he slams on the brakes just after the 100-metre braking board into the right-hander of turn 1. Then it's a quick left to turn 2. Then it's a long sweeping right-hander through turn 3, where you really feel it on the driver's neck and body. The G-forces through there really compound before you come out, hit the brakes, slightly off-camber downhill braking through the right-hander of turn 4 as you head uphill and then brake downhill through the left-hander towards turn 5 as you complete sector 1. Then you get into the slightly more technical middle sector as you make your way, almost threading the needle, up through turn 7 and the slight kink of turn 8 before you come through one of the fastest corners on the track, the right-hander, through turn 9, which brings you onto the back straight DRS zone there. The rear wing will open. Verstappen up on Hamilton's time at the moment, brakes into the left-hander of turn 10. Again, another sweeping left-hander, and then it sweeps all the way round to the right through 12, then 13, which is now one full corner. No more chicane that used to be there. Used to be very troublesome for a lot of the drivers. Out through the final corner of turn 14. Again, another right-hand sweeper, and that is a lap of the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya. And for Max Verstappen, it's 1:14.237 on the medium compound of tyres. Second fastest, but only 2 times on the board.
Yeah, and very early in the session, of course, there'll be lots of tweaks to the cars to improve them from here on in, but that was a lap time that was pretty good by Max Verstappen on a medium tyre in comparison to Lewis Hamilton's soft tyre run. Not a lot in it, just a few hundreds. Just going back to the circuit that you were describing there, Harry, this is a circuit totally different to what we saw last time out in Canada. Obviously very different to the tight, twisty street circuit of Montreal. This one's all about medium to high speed, long duration corners where you're sort of leaning on the car for long periods of time. That's in the first instance, you're leaning on the aerodynamics. You need a very efficient aerodynamic car, but also you're leaning on those tyres, which means that you put an awful lot of stress and strain and build up a huge amount of temperature on those tyres the longer you go through these high speed, long duration corners. So it's a real balancing act from a driver's perspective, together with an engineering challenge to keep those tyres alive.
And talking of which, you may have been hearing some cheers in the background while Mark was talking. That's because Fernando Alonso is doing an outlap in the Aston Martin. On those long corners, they're obviously making hard work for the Aston Martin, which is struggling with mid-corner understeer. So obviously the longer the corner, the more understeer period you have and the slower you're going to go, and that was reflected in the times yesterday. Alonso only 14th fastest, with teammate Lance Stroll obviously slower than him by the requisite 4 tenths, in 18th place, and Alonso Alonso was saying after the session that they're looking like they're on for a bit of a difficult weekend at Aston Martin this weekend.
Fernando Alonso out on track, as you say, Andrew, actually waving to the crowd. Of course, his last win in Formula One came at this very track 185 Grand Prix ago, back in 2013. And I mean, looking at some of the data that was crunching, it almost looked like Alpine might be ahead of Aston Martin, because they had a great Friday.
Well, we'll see about Alpine. Obviously, we don't know on the fuel loads yesterday, but it does look like Aston Martin are going to have a difficult weekend. But I will say about that race in 2013, Fernando Alonso at the start of it, I think he did a 4-stop race in the end.
Yeah.
2013, the Pirelli were experimenting with a different kind of tyre, and it all went a bit wrong with the British Grand Prix a few races later when several of them exploded. Anyway, it was Alonso's second win in the year, and it started with a brilliant overtaking move. 2 cars, he did Raikkonen and Hamilton around the outside of turn 3 on the opening lap to get himself into position behind the Red Bulls and set the foundation for that victory.
Oh, those are the days, weren't there? 49 minutes and 32, 31, 30 seconds remain. Lots more cars coming out on track. Just coming back to our track chat, our calendar chat. Amit, who has been listening intently all weekend long and getting in touch, I'm pleased to say, not after we have had a poor word to say about Alpine, but he said, hashtag BBC F1, it would be nice if Barcelona was to stay on the calendar. Feels like we're losing more and more permanent circuits in place of street circuits. He's got a point.
Yeah, and I think that's a feeling that some of the drivers have even vocalised. I think lots of fans sort of feel the same. Personally, you know, I'm very happy to see street circuits on the calendar. I love, and I feel it's important that we have a mix of different tracks. You know, particularly where we are right now. We've got a second half of this season, almost certainly next season as well, where we've got 3, maybe 4 teams that are very close, and it might actually come down to different types of tracks suiting different cars and driver combinations that swings the balance of performance. I love that. I think we should have a real mix. What I don't think we should ever do is end up where we're so far in one direction, particularly street circuits, which feel like there's a sort of emphasis on the event itself, bringing people into a city. It's important, but should it be dominating the sport? I don't think so. I think we should make sure we retain this sort of traditional type circuit where these wonderful cars are really able to flourish. You don't see a Formula One car at its best on a street circuit, you see it on a track like this.
Now, I suppose to play on that chat, obviously last time we were broadcasting for the Canadian Grand Prix, the FIA revealed their 2026 F1 car plan. So let's hear from Stroll first.
Can you get me a knee pad prepared for the next run? Have some knee pain?
Yeah, copy that, Lance. We'll prepare that. That's understood.
Will that be his knees just sort of juttering together or hitting the side of the cockpit?
It's, yeah, one of those two. So you can either put a knee pad between your 2 knees. Don't forget they're squeezed into a very narrow chassis, and on bumps you can chatter your knees together, which can hurt, and equally they could be rattling against the outside of the cockpit. So that's all it'll be. Very simple fix to a simple problem.
Well, Russell currently tops the session, by the way, 1:13.4. Sainz on a quick lap at the moment, along with Charles Leclerc. So we'll keep a track of those. But just coming back to the 2026 F1 car plans, because you went with us, Mark. Essentially smaller, nimbler, more environmentally friendly cars, engines with a near enough 50-50 split between electrical and internal combustion power. Will that almost help the cause of some European circuits? Because the cars, and I know this, like Monaco street circuits are also a factor here, but the cars have gotten bigger, and that has made overtaking and racing more difficult.
Yeah, it's a fact. I think, you know, I read somewhere this is the first time the cars are aiming to be 30 kilos lighter, which is an enormous challenge, and that's another story in itself, whether it's even achievable. But it will be the first time, I think, Formula One cars have got lighter in something like, I don't know, 30, 40 years. They've just continually got bigger for a long, long period of time. So I think that's a really good move. If we can achieve it, that's great. They are going to be dimensionally shorter and narrower, and that can only help on some of these older circuits where it's narrow. It will even help on street circuits where we're not blessed with these wide tracks that we might be, you know, loving at times like this weekend. So I think it's a huge challenge, the biggest change the sport has seen for possibly ever, where we've got massive power unit changes together with massive chassis changes as well, and actually the whole philosophy of how the technical challenge is brought about in Formula One is changing. This idea of yes, we're going to have perhaps even more power than we have now, but it's going to be brought in a very different way, where a large part of it is from the electrical side, the electrical component of these hybrid power units. So because of that, you have to then change the sort of aerodynamic drag profile of the car, because you simply couldn't have enough electrical power to keep powering you down a long straight. With the cars that we have today, the drag forces would mean you'd run out of energy. So they've now got to have things like wings which will retract, a little bit like a DRS, but they're going to have that front and rear to minimise the drag on the straights. Those elements will pop back up to increase the downforce in the corners. It's an interesting idea. I can't wait to see how it plays out.
Yeah, they got themselves into a bit of a sticky situation, Formula One. They did the engine rules first, and the idea, as Mark says, was to increase the ratio of internal combustion engine power to hybrid power to about 50-50. We don't know exactly where it's going to end up, but it's around about that. And at the moment, it's more like 80-20. But at the same time, in order to attract more manufacturers, and they have succeeded in doing that, because Audi are coming in, Ford are coming in, Honda have decided not to withdraw and continue moving to Aston Martin after 2025 as the works partner. They, it worked to get the engine manufacturers in. So then they set the engine regulations. Then they had to come up with a set of chassis regulations that worked with them. The problem that they had was that they took away the MGU-H, and that was part of the appeal to the other manufacturers, because here's Russell.
Can we just get a bit of foam for a bit of knee padding, please?
More foam. Issues for drivers with banging knees at Mercedes now. So the MGU-H is a very important part of the overall efficiency of these current engines, because it recovers energy from the turbo. They've taken that away because of the complexity and the expense of it, and that's helped Audi and Ford be interested. But it's given them a problem with energy recovery. Where does the energy recovery come from if you're not also using the turbo? And they've been reluctant to open up the front axle to energy recovery, because they think that risks introducing stability control, which anyone who has a sort of relatively advanced road car will know about. Is sort of the idea is it stops you spinning off if you go too fast into a corner and brake in the middle of it. Obviously, they don't want to be having that could be a driver aid in Formula One. So they had to find a way to get more energy recovery from the rear axle, and that meant making the braking zones longer, basically. And how do you make the braking zones longer? Well, you make the car go faster on the straight, so it has to stop from a higher speed. But that has created another problem. Now the teams are a bit worried about the performance profile of the cars. Are they too slow in the corners? Are they too fast down the straights? And although they've published these 2026 regulations 2 weeks ago over the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, the teams basically all went, hang on a minute, we need to talk about this. And so they've all had to sit down again and try and come up with a situation where everybody's happy, which is not the case at the moment.
Jago on hashtag BBC One just says, why don't we put F1 on an oval again? Take that?
I'd take it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's another variable into the mix. Why not?
Although with this movable aero, that might end up being quite tricky.
Not a lot of braking on an oval. It might not really work for Formula One in the new regs.
I mean, when we went to Indianapolis, I know that there were many disasters for Formula One that happened in Indianapolis, but they used half the oval, and then we created this infield section of the circuit, which was a little bit more, braking and slow corners. So it is possible to sort of have a little bit of both. And like I say, I'm all for a nice variety of different types of corners, because from I come at this from a team's perspective, having been in one for so long. You kind of love that challenge. It presents a set of opportunities that, are new, and therefore you might have the chance to excel at other places where you might not. So I love that. Engineering challenges are great for Formula One.
Well, teams now starting to shift their focus ahead of those regulations, but right now we'll focus on free practice 3. It's 41 minutes and 30 seconds to go. It's George Russell who tops the times with a 1:13.4 on the soft compound tyre. Then it's Lando Norris. Carlos Sainz is in third. Then it's Charles Leclerc. That's the sound you're hearing now. He's on the soft tyres. He's just come through sector 1, about 0.003 of a second quicker than George Russell's sector 1 time. Then it's Hamilton in 5th ahead of Verstappen. Ocon is 7th. Piastri Piastri's just slotted up into 8th ahead of Gasly. Perez down in 10th. Ricciardo, Tsunoda, Hülkenberg and Magnussen, the 14 drivers who have set competitive lap times. Stroll, Alonso, Bottas, Joe, Albon and Sargent, who is still in the pits. There's actually a lot of work going on the rear end of the Williams of Logan Sargent, so I wonder if they've got a bit of an issue down there. We'll try and find that one out for you, but he has not yet emerged even once from the pit lane. Charles Leclerc just with a little bit of a moment coming out of turn 12 through the right hander of 13, then 14, almost flat out, just a slight lift through the final corner and across the line. He finds time in the final sector, but not overall. Stays 4th fastest for Charles Leclerc, who hasn't really felt comfortable all day yesterday. He didn't have the full upgrade on Friday on FP1. He did get it for FP2.
Yeah, he had a bit of a tricky day all in all yesterday, but he was saying he knew exactly where to find the time in both himself and in the setup of the car. So he's now just a few thousandths behind teammate Carlos Sainz, 3rd and 4th for Ferraris at the moment. Actually, Lando Norris's time's impressive. He's only just over a tenth behind George Russell in second place, but his time's on the medium tyre rather than the soft, which everyone else apart from Max Verstappen out of the top runners has done. And I'm just looking down for Sergio Perez. Yeah, he's again still struggling. He's at 8 tenths on his first run slower than Verstappen. So he again was saying that he was experimenting with setup yesterday, but we'll see where he ends up.
Yeah, a reminder that Sergio Perez also carries a 3-place grid penalty coming into this weekend after the Canadian Grand Prix, where he crashed out and his car was quite badly damaged, but he still returned to the pits.
Good step forward.
That was good timing.
Happy to hear that.
And there you go. Charles Leclerc was confident yesterday he'd get the car sorted, and he has.
You had that in advance, didn't you? Charles Leclerc, they're much happier today. In fact, both Ferraris seem to be performing very well. They have brought a fair upgrade this weekend. Rear wing, engine cover, floor, diffuser, little bits of the halo as well in their search for more performance off the back, of course, a double DNF in Canada. So they do need to bounce back and get some points on the board, because it affected Charles Leclerc quite badly in the Drivers' Championship, and also Ferrari were much closer to Red Bull, and now that gap is 49 points between Red Bull and Ferrari.
Yeah, really important for Ferrari that to bounce back, because they were on this rate of progress, which was really strong. But actually this season, in the second half of this season and beyond into next season, is really going to be about a development war, isn't it? Because we've got 3, maybe now 4 teams that are pretty much in the mix. Any developments you bring for this season will pretty much carry over in terms of next. No major regulation change at all for next year. So whatever you learn this year will be valuable for you for next season too. So it's about keeping the rate of development going. Obviously, they're in this budget capped era, so they've got to be really clever and strategic and efficient about how they spend their money on what and what that's going to bring to the car. But is whoever does that best, I think, is going to end this season strongest. And we're seeing it already. Ferrari have rushed that upgrade through. It wasn't really planned for this race necessarily, certainly not all the parts of it. They've rushed it through. We may well be seeing the results of that now, with Leclerc seemingly much happier in the car.
Just getting a little replay of Lewis Hamilton locking up, coming into the left-hander of turn 5, ran a little bit wide. It was only a small lock-up though, so not too much damage done to that tyre, but enough to send him offline.
So one of the topics of recent races this year has been Lewis Hamilton's pace. Why is he a little bit further behind George Russell in qualifying than he was last year? Now, the Bull statistics look grim. He's 8-1 down, about a tenth of a second on average slower than Russell. But obviously, a tenth of a second is not that much. So it's not as dramatic as the 8-1 makes it sound. But I've been doing a little bit of digging on this, and the theory in Mercedes is that what's been happening basically is that these cars don't really respond to being hustled. You know, when you're trying to get that last little bit of lap time out of it. And Hamilton has been maybe, when he gets to that point, is trying to extract that tiny last bit of lap time in qualifying. He's doing the hustling thing, which is kind of his natural style, as Mark will be familiar with from the back in the day of Hamilton's early career. And it's just not working for him, and he's just losing out by that tenth or so to Russell. But it is also worth pointing out, Mercedes say that although Hamilton's starting behind Russell, quite often, more often than not in fact, his race pace is better than Russell's. It's just not always that obvious, because obviously you're starting behind, and then it becomes difficult with these tyres particularly to make progress, because again, hustling, you overheat the tyres, and it's you end up quite quickly in a spiral if you're not careful.
It's a really good point. I heard James Allison talking about this, where he was saying, exactly that, Andrew, but he was also talking about how you occasionally see up and down the grid, you'll see one car or driver suddenly pop up with an amazing time, and you wonder where on earth did that come from. And he has this theory in his own mind, unproven, I guess, to some extent via scientific data, but a theory that these cars don't like the hustle in the way that Andrew's just described, and yet typically when it comes to qualifying, everyone has this natural inherent sort of thing they go to, which is to just try a little bit harder, is to push a little bit more. That's what you do. And yet it seems like the best lap times come from this car when you almost relax a little bit, and when you don't really know how you generated it, when you weren't really trying too hard, and that's the sort of the unfamiliar territory that these current cars with these current tyres tend to find themselves in. So I think the suggestion was from James Allison that Lewis Hamilton has been struggling to lose what's an inherent part of his driver characteristics, his style, to sort of to fall in line with a slightly strange car and tyre combination.
I cannot wait to see Lewis Hamilton in a Ferrari alongside Charles Leclerc, and just how that stacks up. Because, I mean, what's the scenario here? If Leclerc does beat Hamilton quite convincingly, then where does that leave Hamilton? And he's getting towards the end of his career. Where does that leave him?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and it's qualifying v race is another thing. We don't know what 2026 cars are going to be like. Hamilton's going to be around for at least 2026, probably 2027 as well, I would imagine, alongside Leclerc as his teammate. I think if he's struggling to out-qualify George Russell, he'll struggle to out-qualify Charles Leclerc. I think Charles Leclerc could be the fastest driver in over one lap in Formula One, and I'm not the only person in the sport who thinks that. He is incredibly fast, particularly around certain kinds of circuits, street circuits. He's brilliant at. And I think he'll be so fast sometimes that Hamilton will be unsettled by it. If you look at the sort of things he's done at Baku and Monaco in the past, for example, he put that 2021 Ferrari on pole in Baku. I never know how he did that. I'm not even sure he knows.
He's got a particular skill around Baku, I think.
Yeah, but it's a skill that is to do with braking and balancing the car on the edge on corner entry where there's a wall waiting for you, and that's a skill that Hamilton has always been really strong at. So I think if Leclerc's better than Hamilton at that might sort of screw Hamilton's head a little bit from time to time. I'm sure he'll be fine. He's Lewis Hamilton. Let's not get carried away. I think that's the overall thing. He'll be fine because he is who he is. But I think it's also important that we don't underestimate what he's facing going into Ferrari. Not only has he got Charles Leclerc as his teammate, who's incredibly fast in qualifying, you've also got the fact that he's going to a different team in a different country with a different culture and a different language. Now, of course, everybody at Ferrari speaks English because you have to in Formula One, but they don't speak English all the time. And so I think it's important that we don't play down too much just what Hamilton is facing in terms of assimilation when he gets to Maranello early next year.
I think that's a really good point. I think the idea of moving to a new culture is actually huge. When you're talking about the fine margins that Formula One operates in, and you often see, and I'm sure Lewis will be the same, that he'll take some familiar faces with him. He'll end up with people there that he knows, that are probably English to some extent, or at least people that he's worked with. Familiarity is a real part of integrating yourself into a new environment like that. I think the other part of this that is a difficult one to know is the shift from a Mercedes to a Ferrari. What sort of inherent style does that Ferrari need to get the best out of it? I don't think it's dramatically different to a Mercedes, whereas if you took let's say a Red Bull, I think we can all say there are some serious differences in the way you need to drive the Red Bull to the way you need to drive a Mercedes, for example. And any driver, I mean, even if you went the other way and you took a Max Verstappen out of the Red Bull, dropped him in a Mercedes, I'm not sure you immediately get instant success. I think there has to be an adaptation. We've already talked about if these cars have this odd occurrence where you can't hustle it around a qualifying lap, and Lewis might be struggling to adapt to that. How will he adapt to, first of all, a Ferrari, and then when it comes to 2026, who knows what those cars will actually need, with a very different, aerodynamic profile, very different performance profile. It could take something very different. So being able to adapt is going to be key, and I don't know who's going to come out on top in that one.
No, coming back to the culture point as well, though, I think it would have been a much more difficult, it would have been a much more difficult task for him if it was almost the Ferrari of old. Whereas now, team principal Fred Vasseur, I don't know him that well, but I don't think his Italian is 100% fluent.
Vasseur doesn't speak Italian, though.
Well,
he's been taking lessons. I know from speaking to him, they're not going very well.
But it does seem like the inherent culture within Ferrari has shifted with Fred Vasseur over the last, year and a half, 2 years now. And it seems like, I remember having a chat with somebody from Ferrari in Monaco, people feel within the team a lot more empowered and motivated, whereas that wasn't the case before.
No, and that will have been a major factor in Lewis's decision to go there. I honestly don't believe Lewis would have necessarily gone there under some of the old regimes that have happened. I know and have worked with a lot of people that have come out of Ferrari, battered and bruised, even on the engineering teams, that have not enjoyed the experience. I think it's very different now under Fred. I think there's a whole different environment, and Lewis is coming into that pretty much exactly the right time, I'd say. Yeah,
so he worked, just to give people who don't know the history, Fred Vasseur worked with Lewis Hamilton in the junior categories. He was his team boss when he won GP2, for example. He's always held him in very high. Hamilton, there's been mutual high regard, I should say, between the two of them, and it's Vasseur and John Elkann, the Ferrari chairman, who worked together to get Hamilton to Ferrari. It's also worth bearing in mind that Jock Clear, who was Hamilton's first performance engineer at Mercedes when he joined in 2013 and stayed there for quite a few years after that, he is now at Ferrari, and as a kind of sort of driver coaching kind of engineer, and he worked very closely with Leclerc actually when Leclerc first joined the team. So that's at least one familiar face, and I agree with Mark. Here's Russell's radio.
The leg padding's loose front left. Copy.
So I think we're hearing a lot of leg padding conversation because of the long high-speed corners at Barcelona. He wouldn't get this around Monaco or Baku, for example, to the same extent. I think I don't know that he's going to take Peter Bono, his engineer, to Ferrari. I don't know whether Bono wants to go, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if Hamilton had asked him, because they've obviously got a sort of very symbiotic relationship between the two of them. It'll be those sorts of things that he needs, or will feel that he wants, just to give himself a bit more of a comfort zone. But I think the fact that Vasseur's there already is going to be quite important for him. And I think Vasseur has a stabilising influence in a team. We've already seen that in Ferrari. He's not getting carried away by the highs or the lows. When you listen to him after a race, he's always very much, we're not winning, we're not winning everything today, we're not losing everything today. Just, stay calm, focus on the next thing, in a way that Ferrari have been guilty of not really doing sometimes in the past, certainly for quite a long time.
I know from my own experience, when Kimi Raikkonen left us at McLaren to go to Ferrari, he felt exactly the same. He needed at least some element of familiarity going into that new environment. And I, along with another number of other people, were asked to go. I had meetings with Ferrari. I nearly went. I nearly picked my family up and moved them out to Italy to be part of Kimi's team, because he wanted that familiarity around him to enable him to slot into the environment easier.
So they must have been offering you massive wage, Mark. Why didn't you go?
Obviously not massive enough.
He wanted more. He wanted to be on the BBC. That's what he wanted.
But he did take his trainer with him. He did take Mark Arnold, a very familiar face. He took him with him, employed him directly, as opposed to the McLaren employing him prior to that. So there were steps taken to make sure that there was at least some element of his comfortable familiarity around him.
Yeah, it's going to be such a fascinating year to build up to, and then to live as well. And I think, coming back to Hamilton and Leclerc in that fight, I think no matter what, those two as a pairing the true benefactor will be Ferrari as the team. They will lift that team together.
I've got a question for you, Mark. How is Lewis with you now?
Really good. The last time I actually had a conversation with him was a few months back. I did an interview with him. And actually it was really nice because we don't get to speak to each other very often. Of course, when you work with somebody week in, week out, you have chats every weekend. You sort of get to know each other a little bit. Since he's left the team and gone on to do his thing and I've moved on as well, you actually rarely, even though we see each other at Grand Prix, it's a quick hello and a wave. You never get the chance to have a chat. So yeah, a couple of months ago I did an interview with him on behalf of one of Mercedes' sponsors, and it was really lovely, you know, behind the camera to just sit and catch up about old times. We looked through some old photos together of back in the day, and you know, he's a lovely guy. I have so much time and respect for Lewis. He has so much passion still for this sport, and I still think he's got a lot to give, and as you say, Ferrari are going to be the benefit factor of that.
That was the voice of the former F1 mechanic, Mark Priestley, alongside myself, Harry Benjamin. We've also got the BBC's F1 correspondent, Andrew Benson, hashtag BBC F1. Thanks for getting in touch. Stu says it's slightly odd listening to Mark Priestley on BBC F1 while I've got the telly on with the sound off, and he's sitting alongside Mike Brewer in a lovely old Mini. Talk about moving on. That's what you moved on to. 25 minutes and 30 seconds remain of free practice 3. It's George Russell fastest on that soft compound tyre, 1:13.4. Just over a tenth between himself and Lando Norris, who sits second, but he did set that lap time on the medium tyre, so a really good lap from Norris. Sainz and Leclerc are third and fourth. Then it's Hamilton in fifth, Verstappen, Ocon, Piastri, Gasly, Albon the top 10. Bottas, Alonso's down in 12th with Perez just behind him. Sargent is 14th. Then it's the RB of Daniel Ricciardo. Stroll 16th ahead of Joe. Sonoda 18th. Hulkenberg and Magnussen, the two Haas drivers, right at the back, but they are out on that hard compound tyre. Well, they were. They're now in the pits, so they are currently 19th and 20th. The sound you're hearing right now is Fernando Alonso, one of two home heroes here, and along with Carlos Sainz, of course. Sainz actually never stood on the podium at this track in his home Grand Prix. Might be his last chance to do so as well. We've mentioned Hamilton will be off to Ferrari, of course. He'll be replacing Carlos Sainz.
You're writing off the rest of Carlos Sainz's career already, Harry.
No, it might. Well, no, I would never. But it begs the question. We spoke about it yesterday. He's got two options on the table, really, hasn't he, for next year? It's Williams or Sauber, which becomes Audi in 2026. And it's okay. Both have potential. But I think for the next couple of years, if he goes to either team, he's not going to be on the podium regularly, as he is now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He's got to think a sort of long game, which is a very difficult thing to think of ahead of a major regulation change coming in 26, where no one really knows who's going to be a top performer. So it's a difficult choice for him. But his choice that he's about to make of where he is going to drive for next year and beyond is kind of holding up all of the other driver market decisions up and down the grid. A lot of drivers waiting to see what Carlos does before they're able to then slot into the vacant positions that are left.
Yeah, we're expecting some sort of announcement to happen soon. Carlos Sainz coming into this weekend, giving signs that he's kind of ready to make a decision now. He's had probably an offer from every single team on the grid that has a vacant slot, although probably not quite the offers he was holding out for with Mercedes and Red Bull. Alpine is one of the teams that technically has two slots available. Pierre Gasly contract is up at the end of the year. Esteban Ocon has already announced he's leaving the team. Mutual consent. So there are two options there. Jack Doohan, the reserve driver, is very much in the hunt. And so far this weekend, it is still practice, but the two Alpines have been in the top 10 pretty consistently. Ocon's currently 7th. Gasly, is in 9th at the moment. They're off the back of a double points finish, and they've got some upgrades this weekend. They haven't, but they've got a lot of Flovers on the back of their rear wing. So far, Mark, this seems quite encouraging for Alpine.
Yeah, they certainly had a good day yesterday, which I think surprised a few people, perhaps even them. The only thing I'd say about looking at today, they've got a lot of runners behind them in the pecking order that are only running medium tyres at this point, and so their soft tyre runs perhaps look a little better than the general paces. But having said that, you know, the runs that they did yesterday have seen some improvement. Had a good outing in Canada a couple of weeks ago, albeit fortuitous to some extent. But yeah, they're not looking like a team that's last on the grid at the moment, are they?
Yeah, I would also say about Canada, just to give that some context, as Mark says, it was fortuitous because both Ferraris and one Red Bull basically took themselves out of the picture, and that would have put the Alpines out of the points. They took advantage of that situation. Well done, but it was, I think, a bright new dawn. It wasn't.
No. Flavio Briatore might be, though. The bright new dawn for Alpine.
Who knows?
I did hear actually that they're a bit lost technically, so they put a new floor on the car a few races ago, and a little bird tells me it's only worth 3 points of downforce, which is like tiny margins, and they don't understand why it hasn't worked in the way that they expected it to, and they've been reduced to like taking photos of other cars and just copying them and seeing if that works.
It's a strategy that's worked for others.
Yeah, when in doubt.
I wonder how much a new
Poor old
floor.
Amit Mandali is
Yeah,
probably
sorry,
listening to
Amit.
this.
Sorry, we should have played the. Producer Paddy, we got to get a jingle for this Alpine chat.
I wonder how much a new floor, probably, I don't know, what, £250,000 or something, let's say, ballpark, and it's brought 3 points of downforce. That is not a good way to spend your money in a budget capped era, is it? They would have obviously been hoping for a lot more, but it's a really important factor in today's Formula One. Every update you bring really has to count for something. It has to add massive value, because you can't afford to just bring endless updates. So that'll be really disappointing for them.
And I don't think they're expecting any upgrades before the summer break now for Alpine, if Pierre Gasly is to be believed, coming into the build-up to this weekend. So
Flavio Briatore, is he an upgrade?
Well, the team thinks so. So there you go. 20 minutes and 4 seconds remain of free practice 3. The majority of cars in the pits, the exception of Norris, Sainz, who else is out there? Piastri's on an outlap, so too is Albon, and we've also got Perez and Sargent going around, mixture of soft and medium compound tyres for the time being. I'll tell you who we haven't spoken about a lot. Oscar Piastri. He's kind of gone a bit under the radar so far this weekend. He's currently out on track. He's 8th fastest. He's on an outlap at the moment on the soft compound of tyre. He has been running around on medium, but his teammate is currently up in 2nd. So it'll be interesting to see what Piastri can do on this set of soft compound tyres. But how have you seen and rated Oscar Piastri's 2nd season in Formula One?
I'm really hesitant to say disappointed, because, and the only reason I say that is from a sort of place of having such a high benchmark. In his rookie season, he showed so much promise, and I still think that promise is all there. I actually rate him very, very highly as a driver, but so far he just hasn't quite managed on consistently, at least, to match Lando Norris. And it seems the same so far this weekend. It's still a long way to go in this weekend, and I don't actually think there's a lot between them. But of course, Norris now he's still a young driver, but he has quite a bit of experience, which Piastri doesn't have. And particularly when you get into race scenarios, the experience can really count, particularly in places like Canada when there's changeable conditions. That's when your experience really can dig you out of a hole and just bring an extra couple of positions or points over the course of a Grand Prix weekend. So I think his performances will continue to improve. I'm not worried about him in any way. I think he's a talented driver, and I think it's actually a really strong driver lineup that McLaren have got. Yeah,
he's got 1 podium in Monaco, 2nd place for him, whereas obviously Lando Norris a 3rd in Australia, the 1 Miami, of course, and then 2 second places, Imola and Canada. And Norris has been on fire, really, this season. He's been absolutely smashing. He's 3rd in the Drivers' Championship at the moment, but he's only a handful of points, 7 points behind Charles Leclerc. And McLaren, they've been on a right old roller coaster ride over the last few years, haven't they? Since we entered the hybrid era, it's been a tough innings for them, and then suddenly they've had a brilliant car, and they've had the trajectory moving upwards, and then we came to 2020 for the new ground effect car regulations, 2022, sorry, and then suddenly they were right at the back again.
Yeah, I mean, things are looking really strong for McLaren right now, and it hasn't come about through some magic bullet someone's discovered. It's been building over all of those years. It's that famous old saying that it took 10 years to become an overnight success. It's all the work that's been going on in the background. All the struggles they've been through in those tough years are what are now paying them back. So they've been learning through those times, putting it into practice, building the right people within the team. Zach Brown has assembled a really strong organisation with a great culture under Andrea Stella, and it's now starting to pay dividends. And what we're seeing now is they're right back up at the sharp end, that's got some space to grow even further. We've got one more year of this set of regulations before everything changes again. So I would expect McLaren to be right up there, potentially even championship challengers, if not by the end of this season, certainly next.
This is the sound of Lando Norris embarking on a quick lap on the soft compound tyre, works his way through the right hand, then the left hand of turns 1 and 2. Piastri also out on track, just coming towards the end of his lap on the soft compound tyres. It'll be interesting to see where Piastri goes. He puts in a 1:13.9 to put himself 7th fastest. That's about 0.3 slower at the moment than Lando Norris managed on the soft tyre earlier on today.
I think Piastri must have made a mistake because his time was oscillating around purple.
I think final sector something happened.
He must have made a mistake. Yeah,
I think final sector something happened there for Piastri. So that lap put him 7th fastest. We haven't seen if there was a mistake, but I'm sure we'll get a replay at some point. Meanwhile, Norris goes fastest of anybody in the middle sector with just over 15 minutes remaining, starting to ramp up with the lap times at the moment, almost getting onto the gravel. Indeed, he did get onto the gravel, coming through the right-hand sweeper of turn 12. The rear end just slightly kicking out. And actually, even as he comes round the final corner, Mark, and he goes fastest of anybody, almost 0.4 up on George Russell, the bottom of the car really skidding along the surface of the tarmac, sparks flying at that part.
That was a really strong lap from Lando Norris, right on the ragged edge. You could see that the element of it that we watched, there wasn't a lot left. And yeah, the fact that it's scraping on the floor is because of this very fast, long duration corner where the downforce is pushing the car down into the tarmac. They run very low anyway, of course, but he managed to absolutely maximise it. So that is a real line in the sand from McLaren and Lando Norris, a 1:13.0.
And the sound you just heard was the mistake from Oscar Piastri. Dipped 2 wheels into the gravel as he slid out into the runoff area, approaching the fast right-hander of turn 13, and he's strewn a lot of gravel back on track, Mark.
It looks with Piastri there that he was literally just going too quickly around the corner, because it was almost a 4-wheel drift. All 4 wheels broke traction, which is a sign it's not understeer, it's not oversteer, it's both ends of the car sliding together, which typically means you've just exceeded the grip level. A nicely balanced car, that might suggest, but it's just going too quickly. The encouraging thing, as Andrew said, his lap up until that point was flickering into the purple zone on our timing screens, meaning that at times he was the quickest of anybody. So both McLarens looking really strong.
McLaren in the mix here, for sure. Mercedes up there, Ferrari too, and you can't ever rule out Red Bull, particularly Max Verstappen. Perez has got a mission on his hands, given his form lately, but also carrying a 3-place grid penalty into this race, so no matter where he qualifies, he will be docked 3 positions. And who else is up there at the moment? Well, the 2 Haas drivers are up there on the soft compounder tyre in 9th and 10th. Not seen what everybody has got yet. At the back, a bit anonymous at the moment for the 2 Saubers of Bottas and Zhou. So too for the 2 RBs, which aren't particularly having a great run of things at the moment. Ricciardo and Tsunoda, 17th and 20th. But I tell you what, Fernando Alonso, he's on an outlap at the moment. He's gone out on the soft compounder tyre, so we'll see what he's got. He's just coming through the middle sector now. But I mean, they had a double points finish in Canada, but again, that was a bit of a crazy race with the rain. And it's almost since he signed his contract, signed away his future with Aston Martin, the performance, has it dropped, or have others just improved?
Yeah, I think it's largely the latter. And as we talked about earlier, this is now a real development war in Formula One, up and down the grid, not just at the front end. And even Fernando Alonso urging his own team over the last couple of weeks to bring more performance. We need to keep this upgrade, rate of upgrades coming, and it's absolutely true. That's what Formula One at the end of 2024 and into 25 is going to be about. How much can you bring technical upgrades, and how much performance will those upgrades bring? So he's urging his team to do more, which they need to do if they want to stay in touch with any of the guys towards the front end of this grid, because the battle is tight. I think what's going to be fascinating, Fernando now on the soft tyre, what's going to be really interesting, the one we're all kind of waiting for, is Max Verstappen, who hasn't yet done his soft tyre run, is still in the garage at the moment with just over 12 minutes to go, but at some point we'll see him emerge on a soft set of tyres, and that will be a very clear indication of what we might expect going into qualifying, perhaps compared to those McLarens.
Lewis Hamilton with a mighty middle sector, but he was really struggling for grip coming through the right-hander of turn 12. He goes second fastest, though. Lost a bit of time in that final sector, 3/10 down on Lando Norris. Russell, his teammate, just on an outlap at the moment. Who else is out there? We've got the two Haas cars out there, and still no Verstappen, as you say, Mark. We will wait with bated breath to see what he has on show. Ricciardo's out there on an outlap too. Stroll's just begun a quick lap on the soft compounded tyres, but still waiting for a few of the bigger hitters to come out on track, particularly the two Ferraris, Sainz and Leclerc. They currently do sit 4th and 5th, though. Sainz has the fastest overall first sector, Hamilton fastest in the middle, Norris fastest in the final sector.
I wonder if Verstappen's absence on track is slightly ominous. He set a medium tyre run, which actually was very quick in comparison to the soft tyre runners at the time. I wonder if he's actually just very happy with the car, sitting in the garage, seeing the time out and really not needing to change anything, waiting till the track's at its most optimum, waiting to show his hand towards the end of the session as the clock runs down, or he'll stick that soft tyre on. He does feel a little bit more comfortable, seem at least a little bit more comfortable, and as we said all the way through this weekend, this is a circuit that should, in theory at least, suit that Red Bull. I heard Helmut Marko say yesterday they hadn't really turned the engines up yesterday in comparison to some others, so maybe there's still a lot more to come from Max Verstappen, and I suspect in the next 10 minutes, as we have now left, we're about to see it.
George Russell out on track on a quick lap. His teammate Lewis Hamilton just went second fastest, and we're just seeing a replay as he approaches the left-hander of turn 5, going quite slowly. Is there a car about to come down the inside of him? Yes, there is, and he does apologise, and there's contact with the Aston. It's the Aston Martin of Lance Stroll, who comes down the inside at turn 5 and feels like he's been blocked by Hamilton.
Yeah, I think he's alone on the track.
It's ironic because someone was saying that about Stroll yesterday, weren't they?
There's something quite amusing about Lance Stroll calling Lewis Hamilton this guy.
But they've made contact.
He's deliberately driven into him there, Lance Stroll, actually, which is really, Sebastian Vettel got a penalty for that in the Baku Grand Prix a few years back. Was it 2017, I think?
Yeah.
That's not going to happen today because it's only practice, but a bit petulant from Stroll.
Yeah, and Hamilton did actively try and get out of the way there, but not the best reaction from Lance Stroll, who's currently down in 18th. He is out there still on the soft compounded tyre, so is Daniel Ricciardo. That's the sound you can hear at the moment in the RB, which both seem to be struggling for pace. They've got an upgrade this weekend, which they've said appears to be working, but just not enjoying outright pace on this track. Let's see what he's got, though, as he comes across the line. Does improve, gets himself up to 11th on the soft tyres. Yeah,
that's not bad. I mean, I think we need to see more from Daniel Ricciardo just generally, but not too bad. I think what's interesting is we've now got Max Verstappen on the soft tyre on an outlap, coming towards the end of that outlap, so we're about to see exactly who the potential favourite for this race, Max Verstappen, has got to offer when his car is in the fastest trim possible ahead of when it really matters later on this afternoon.
Yeah, later on this afternoon it is when it starts to ramp up. Just to let you know, qualifying will be on the BBC Sport website and app. That'll be from 2:55 in the afternoon, with the session starting at 3 o'clock. And you can now listen to our F1 coverage on your smart speaker. All you have to do is ask BBC Sounds to play Spanish Grand Prix Practice 3, or for later on today, just ask BBC Sounds to play Spanish Grand Prix Qualifying, and you can get us on your smart speaker of choice. Isn't that lovely? We'll be on air from 3 o'clock, but before that, in the build-up, we've got more Euro 2024 action from Germany, Georgia and Czech Republic in action from 2 o'clock. That's on BBC Radio 5 Live for you. So plenty of sport coming up across the rest of the weekend on the 5 Live network. Right now, though, just over 7.5 minutes left of FP3 ahead of qualifying later this afternoon. Carlos Sainz coming towards the end of his quick lap. He goes fastest by less than half a tenth of a second. Sainz with a 1:13.0, but Verstappen is out on track on the soft tyre, coming round the final sector now. He's got a couple of corners remaining. The fast right-hander of 13, immediately feeding into the right-hander of 14. The DRS line beckons, the rear wing flap opens up, and it's third fastest for the Dutchman, a 1:13.0, but there is absolutely nothing between the top three, less than a tenth.
Isn't this wonderful? Look at this, the top 4 cars, which is 4 different teams, just over a tenth between them and less than a tenth between the top 3. So this is very, very close. Perez some 7 tenths off the leader in the second Red Bull, so still not good enough from Sergio Perez with the soft tyres on his car. But this is going to be fascinating for this afternoon, because I can't call it. I don't think anybody can. We've got Charles Leclerc now on a very fast lap as well, so Ferrari are in this, Red Bull in the hands of Verstappen are in this, McLaren are definitely in it, and Mercedes might well want to join that party too.
Yeah, Charles Leclerc fastest of anybody in the middle sector as he now makes his way towards the left-hander of turn 7. This the technical parts of the circuit. Then you're into the fast right-hander of turn 9 onto the back straight. You get a dose of DRS getting up to over 300 kilometers an hour before you slam onto the brakes into the left-hander of turn 10. Running a little bit wide though for Charles Leclerc, fastest of anybody still in the middle sector. Then you feed through the first arcing right of turn 12. Careful not to run out too wide into the gravel. He manages the Ferrari nicely. The pit lane entry then comes up to your right hand side. He stays out on track round the final corner, turn 14, and onto the start finish straight. Takes the line with a 1:13.0. Lost a bit of time in that final sector, but again slots up into thirds and less than half a tenth, 300ths of a second. It's Sainz, Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, all within a tenth of a second, and then Russell just another half a tenth adrift in 5th.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. This is so exciting ahead of qualifying, and actually I've got to say, from Charles Leclerc, the encouraging thing is there is a lot more time still from that Ferrari. Even despite the lap he did, he lost a huge chunk in that final sector. He was up on everybody all the way through the lap until that big moment where he ran wide. So there's time still to come from Charles Leclerc, and that's slightly ominous for everybody else.
Perez though, 7th fastest, 7 tenths off. That's not good enough. I don't think he made a mistake either on his lap.
No, it's not good enough, and it's actually really important. You know, we talk about this development war and how there's 3 or 4 teams now in this battle. Although for all the dominance that Red Bull have had in the early part of the season, the Constructors' Championship particularly is not a given. You know, you'd have said it after the first 5 or 6 races, they're going to walk away with it. But that's not the case, because everybody else has stepped up their game and is now a genuine contender and challenger. And if they've got 2 cars in the fight as opposed to 1 car at Red Bull, there's every chance that championship lead could slip away.
Absolutely. Hamilton's just ahead of him in 6th, but Hamilton did make a mistake coming out of turn 12, just lacked grip, and that saw him going wide into the gravel, so lost a bit of time there. So there's more time in the bank for Lewis Hamilton. He's about 3.5 tenths off at the moment. Then there's a big old jump to Perez. Albon is 8th. Alonso was 9th in that soft tyre run. Then Piastri currently 10th. He's in the pits and did his soft tyre running a little bit earlier on. Ocon and Gasly, the 2 Alpines, nip and tuck. They've just slotted into 11th and 12th ahead of Hulkenberg in the Haas, who's 13th. Bottas is 14th ahead of Magnussen. Ricciardo 16th. Stroll is 17th. Tsunoda on an outlap at the moment, and will be hoping to find some sort of glimmer of performance. He has been right at the back of the timings so far this weekend. He's ahead of Joe, and Logan Sargent currently 20th and last.
Yeah, down the back of the grid it's very, very tight. You know, the odd point is going to make a huge difference in your championship season, both to where you finish, but as a result of that, how much money you get in terms of the prize money for the Constructors' Championship. These little differences, and it is small differences, make a massive difference. So the fight is very, very real at the back, as much as it is for the contenders for the championship at the top end. No less important to any of those drivers or teams. So the differences between the likes of Ricciardo, Tsunoda and Zhou and Bottas, they are really, really important for those guys.
Yeah, it certainly is. And all of them scrapping for seats for next year. The likes of, well, Valtteri Bottas, Kevin Magnussen, Daniel Ricciardo, Zhou Guanyu, Logan Sargent, all out of contract at the end of this season, and we will lose 1, maybe 2, maybe even more of those drivers come the end of the year, especially when we have a strong grid already, but also you have the youngsters in Formula 2 like Kimi Antonelli, Oliver Behrman, who expect to be on the grid. He was taking part for Haas in FP1. He'll be back in action for FP1 in Silverstone for the British Grand Prix in a couple of weeks' time. And equally, you've got the likes of Jack Doohan as a reserve driver for Alpine. There is a lot of young talent out there absolutely chomping at the bit. And these old experienced pros, well, they've got to be on their A game all the time, because if they've not, they've got replacements.
It's very true. You know, I think if you look at recent years in Formula One, the trend has been to keep the more experienced driver as your sort of default option, whereas actually I think it's shifting. We've seen the likes of Behrman and others come into this sport with an opportunity and really nail it. And I think actually, I said it yesterday, I think we're going to see the biggest influx of young rookie drivers coming into the sport next year that we've seen for a long time, both because there's some great talent out there, but also teams want to get these guys bedded into their organisations and into their teams ahead of this major regulation change for 26. So bringing somebody in for next year actually makes a lot of sense. Just quickly also on the track action, I think we've probably seen the last of the flying track action and lap times being set, because we've got the slippery surface flag out, the yellow and red flag out towards the end of the lap for all that gravel that was flicked onto the circuit, I think from Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, and also from the stewards, that turn 5 incident between Hamilton and Stroll will be investigated after the session. So we'll either bring you updates of that if anything does come through it, but often in practice nothing does, in our qualifying show later on today, or you can keep on top of the BBC Sport website and app for all the latest. Now, less than a minute to go. I've had a really great, interesting Spanish fact that I've not been able to get into the coverage anywhere. Can I get it in?
Let's do it.
So did you know that the tooth fairy in Spain is actually a mouse called Ratoncito Perez? Did you know that?
I can't say I did, mate.
I hope I pronounced that right. But I've had that ratified by 2 Spaniards, and it is correct. So,
I mean, staggering.
So there you go. That's my FP3 fact of the day. Enjoy that one. With less than 30 seconds left on the clock, no quick laps coming in. Just a couple out there putting in the rounds on those soft compound of tyres. With when there's contact between Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris. It certainly looked like contact as they came downhill towards turn 7. Charles Leclerc, my apologies, not Carlos Sainz.